Welcome to another Stompy 51 miniature adventure. Today we're going to be flipping through a book Games Workshop issued a long time ago, setting out all of the entries for the Golden Demon Awards 1989, and therewith getting a bit of a sense of whether they painted better or worse in the 1980s. I mean, whoever's version you're in, 1989 was a long time ago. And where were you? Were you in crowds in Europe chanting "Wir sind das Volk"? No, what was it? "Wir sind ein Volk"? Were you one of about 4 people who probably knew that Tim Berners-Lee had just invented the World Wide Web? Or like me, were you just a kid in a playground somewhere, playing with marbles and being grossed out by the Garbage Pail Kids cards that other kids were swapping? I still hate Nurgle. And so let's go on a journey beyond sight and sound into the 80s. A blank canvas of fantasy miniatures. So the cover was painted by Bob Naismith, who I'm sure has been on loads of cool YouTube interviews of late. All the character, simple colours, and the Golden Demon with his paint pots and little minions is alive and well. Interestingly, obviously, there's the Games Workshop office based in Nottingham, but there's a Games Workshop Inc. based in Benson Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland. So they're already obviously started conquering Los Estados. The introduction tells us a few things. On the 27th of May, the Derby Assembly Rooms played host to the chaos, conflict and fun that was Games Day 1989. It was a spectacular day. And after the crowds had gone, the one impression that really remained was the astonishing display of enthusiasm for the hobby, already called the hobby. Andy Jones, responsible for organising it all. The success of the Golden Demon Awards in 1988 made it apparent that there would be capacity for an even bigger event in 1989. So I'll have to find the book from 1988. We decided this year we wanted to feature every aspect of the Games Workshop hobby, from miniature painting and model building through to artwork and illustration. Most of all, we wanted to focus on the fun, challenge and excitement of playing Games Workshop games. Bit of a change that from the corporate approach towards monetizing basically everything. But, it's a business. We respect that. The first step was to set up gaming leagues across the country for both Blood Bowl and Dark Future. Is that the Mad Max kind of game? I don't remember ever playing it. There were local playoffs, regional heats across the Games Workshop stores across the country. 2 winners and runners-up from each heat went on to the Games Day National Finals. In previous years, Games Day had been held in London, quite right. Although this was quite prestigious, it no longer made sense to hold an event with a national focus in the south of England. GW was into levelling up already in the 80s. When we saw the assembly rooms in Derby, we knew that Games Day had found a new home. I'm not even sure where Derby is. Is it in the Midlands? All I know is the sat-nav always goes Derby, as if it's in East Yorkshire. But anyway, as well as the Golden Demon Awards, Dark Future and Blood Bowl competitions, Games Day was to be the venue for the 1989 Osprey Warhammer Fantasy Battle World Championship playoffs. Adeptus Titanicus bring in battle competition, and then Andy Warwick's game of 40k. The overall winner was Ian Shaw, who achieved 21 kills and earned £50 worth of Games Workshop vouchers for his stunning display of leadership. 50 quid, what can they get you these days? A Space Marine Captain plastic miniature. Money well spent. On the other side of the main arena, Mighty Empires, Rick Priestley and Nigel Stillman's new campaign system for Warhammer Fantasy Battle was given its first public preview. Although the most common question from those who saw it was, when can I buy it? The "ooh, shiny" was already a facet of the community, even those days. Sean, who's Sean? Sean was later seen amidst the crowd screaming "Daka, Daka, Daka," though no explanation could be seen for offering such behaviour. I hadn't realised "Daka, Daka, Daka" was a little running Orky gag as far back as the 80s. Anyway, so what have we got here in terms of miniatures? So we've got that werewolf, that Blood Bowl werewolf. Where is it? There it is. Let's get a bit of a closer look. The werewolf, Blood Bowl star player. I'm sure I had him at some point. A Knights Panther conversion by Phil Lewis, possibly mimicking a piece of artwork, I'm sure. Squat for a Squat Adeptus Mechanicus miniature. Now that's genius and something they should definitely reprise. Terminator's already a pretty set thing. A Gene Stealer Megas conversion on the bottom left over there. And a Chaos Beastman conversion. A lot of conversions because I guess there was only limited variety across the various ranges. A Viking Fighter by Colin Dixon, which I'm sure you can get from All Games Foundry these days. And a little Gobbo, who looks very Kev Adams. And I think I've spoken about this before, but look at that Chaos conversion by John Blanche. I know he's a genius, but yuck. I've never liked that kind of grim, glossy look. So the Blood Bowl tournament they speak about. There are loads of Warhammer Fantasy battle tables. And there doesn't seem to be any 40k battle tables, which is a bit strange, seeing as it now utterly dominates. Studio staff. The following pages show just some of the fine work from the Games Workshop studio staff. The miniature painters, Ivan Bartfleet, John Blanche, Andy Craig, Phil Lewis, Darren Matthews, Mike McVeigh, and Tim Prowl. And also the artists, Paul Bonner, also Colin Dixon, Brian George, and Andy Warwick. Their combined efforts show all of the departments at the design studio are quite capable of wielding a mean brush. The Triceratops with a Chaos Warrior Rider by Tony Cottrell. I guess in those days they just went to the local toy store, pillaged the dinosaurs box, and then just painted these things up. Cool that we now actually have Seraphon versions. The Blood Bowl Ogre by Ivan Bartfleet. That looks quite funky. I think I had him at one point. These confrontation miniatures I hadn't realised were so old. Bunch of humans with las guns. That Dwarf Champion, still totally plausible. Chaos conversion. I've never really been into Slaanesh. An epic scale Dreadnought. That's quite cool and funky. A Heroic Fighter by Colin Dixon. That's a beautiful little miniature. And I'm sure there are loads of kind of latter day, Oldhammer type copies being made of that particular miniature. A mounted champion of Chaos conversion. This miniature you still see floating around on eBay, so they must have made quite a few, or rather, it was one of them where no one chucked it out. Thrud by Paul Bonner. I mean, Paul Bonner is a fantastic artist. I never realised Thrud was a Games Workshop miniature. Shows what I know. High Helm by Ivan Bartfleet. Reaver Titan by Darren Matthews. Eldar conversion by John Blanche. And a Hero Quest Wizard prototype, so presumably hasn't come out yet. And a Champion of Nurgle by Paul Benson, with some amazing freehand on that banner. I must say the freehand and all the banners across this book are fantastic. Bit of Blood Bowl there. An Orc Gargant by Darren Matthews. And I've come across some fantastic 3D sculpts for Epic of late, particularly of Orcs. Is it Red Nebula? The only thing is, I have no idea who plays this anymore, or where you would get the Epic rules from. An Eldar Titan by Andy Craig. I mean, those Eldar really have borne the test of time. An Ogre by Colin Dixon, who looks slightly confrontation, actually. And kind of South Pacific as well, in terms of the paint job. Good fun and all. Space Marine by Dave Andrews. That must be from the plastic Space Marine box set. I mean, they really didn't have a lot to work with sometimes, and the paint jobs had to basically work with what they had. But they did well. A Blue Horror by Kev Adams. I wonder who sculpted it. Maybe it was Kev Adams. I mean, I've always been amazed with Elder Harlequins how everyone manages to get all those kind of late Renaissance Harlequin type patterns painted onto such a tiny surface. I always loved those plastic Imperial Guardsmen. And look how versatile they were. I mean, he's a traitor guardsman with that fantastic banner and skull on top. I wish someone would do a 3D STL of those heads. I can't remember, I think, was it Victoria Miniatures? Someone does some heads, but here in the UK, they're just agonizingly expensive, which I suppose an Australian would say is ironic because everything in the hobby is agonizingly expensive for them. That's an interesting take on a Chaos Warrior. You wouldn't see that these days. Multicolored checks. Dwarf Engineer by Colin Dixon. I mean, those kind of funky dwarf faces have really stood the test of time. So this is Ivan Bartfleet. The awesome work of staff painter Ivan Bartfleet, a regular winner of Golden Demon Awards and overall victor in 1988. It was only a matter of time before we offered Ivan a job at the design studio at twopence halfpenny a week. Ivan started painting miniatures in 1983 when a college friend introduced him to Citadel Miniatures. He was still taking a course in industrial model making and immediately saw the model's potential. And over there, some necromancers calling up the dead from their long entombed places of rest. A Chaos Beastman of Tzeentch. I tell you, a modern designer for GW could just page through this and just, extrapolate all manner of coolness. I suspect that's exactly what they do. Raiding the toy store again, a scratch-built War Mammoth and Howdah, the Blood Bowl Treeman. I never had that guy, but there are much better models around now. And here we have a tank made out of toilet roll, plasticard, and I have no idea. Scratch-built Orc Battle Roller. So totally made out of literal. And here we have the Golden Demon Awards 1989. Albeit there seems to be a lot of gaming going on. That's a Warhammer Fantasy Battle game going on. Gary Chalk's Warhammer Fantasy Battle Siege in progress. Oh, Gary Chalk art. Pete Knifton. And why does that name ring a bell? Was he big in Necromunda in the end? By which I mean to say, of course, Blood Bowl. Pete Clifton was all over Blood Bowl. Some, I think, bits and pieces of 40k, but I think largely Blood Bowl. And his is that kind of really almost piercing two-tone black and white style that looks very Judge Dredd 80s comic-y and is very effective, really. Marine and Terminator armor. Is it Mark 1 armor? And obviously this was a popular model because it appears 1, 2, 3 times. But what's amazing about it is how people have basically gone to town detailing the surfaces with little miniature paintings on each one. I mean, that's just a tiger pattern or leopard print pattern across the entire body of the miniature, which must have taken ages because it's not that big. They had Marine Scouts already in 1989. Greater Demon of Slaanesh. But it's amazing how you could get such flat painting. There doesn't seem to be much, edge highlighting or weathering or any of that, which is obviously a newish development. But the creativity's still there. Instead of ET Phone Home, you've got like Space Marine Phone Home. An Orc Dreadnought conversion, always a fantastic miniature. And one for which there are many STLs these days out there. An Ogre Drummer by Phil Lawrence. I mean, sometimes I think these things are just ridiculous. Greater Demon of Tzinch and Slanesh with giant spider body and wings. I mean, a flying spider, a flying elf, basically, you know, a flying Chaos Warrior. You know, there was only so much you could do in terms of conversion. I suppose you just grab some wings and stick them on the back of anything and it's a conversion. Flying stuff, largely Eldar flying stuff, although, you know, a flying dwarf. Converted Rhino and Orcs by Craig Sparks, presumably made largely out of balsa wood and a cereal box, but nothing wrong with that. So they already had a Predator in 1989. Crikey. And that Land Raider, way ahead of its time. Although what the Harlequins are doing, prancing about on top of the Land Raider, I don't know. But I guess, what could people do? Frankenstein, Blood Bowl star player as Standard Bearer by Steve Wingate. Standards give you the chance to show off your skills on a larger scale than allowed by a single miniature. And they certainly do. I mean, look at that. These are proper artists. Proper artists. What's that? Orc Standard Bearer by Scott Higton. Although again, you know, is it necessary to have to have an eyeball in the guy's mouth and loads of intestinal grotesqueness? You know, look at me, straight-laced, down-the-line kind of guy, and all these people clearly watching Night of the Living Dead. Which, interestingly, comes out later on, early in the following year, as one of a range of pretty grim horror films colouring the minds of those who are drawn to the hobby at that stage. Upon which we come to the vignettes, with a lot more inter-evil cooperation in the 80s than you get these days, with an orc lowering a Chaos Knight onto steed by Anthony Warrington. I mean, this was a real thing in the Middle Ages, wasn't it? It was the only way they could get knights onto their horses because they just weighed so much. They had to be lowered down on a winch. Even more raiding of the local toy store, an Orc Howder by Mark Watson. I mean, did people play with these things? Probably not. Just a good modelling opportunity. An Eldar Scout and War Demon Assault Dreadnought by Marek Sroka. Crikey, there are these, I don't know if you can see it, there are these tiny white little dots across the entire thing and a face painted onto the frontal canopy, or whatever it's called, of the Dreadnought. And I think I saw this in the 1990 Golden Demon booklet, but raiding wedding cake toppers was absolutely de rigueur. Dwarves and elves try to steal a golden demon from a serpentine dragon. Very clever. Fighting fantasy ogre conversion, Pulps and Eldar Warrior. I mean, that looks humongous, so that must have been largely sculpted. I mean, I'm not sure how good that one is. I mean, the face is better than I can paint, but, you know, it's pretty simplistic stuff. Eldar, Harlequin and Dreadnought salute their fallen comrade by Ian Duthie. But it's very creative. Monsters, A Greater Demon and Chaos Sorcerer by John Toyer. And, I mean, these, ostensibly they look all right from afar, but there's just this intense, thick glossiness to the paint, as if it's been painted with enamels. And I tend to like that more matte look. Renegade by Bradley Wells. Mach 1 twin turbo Royce Renegade. So presumably they've got that from the hobby shop, mashed it up a bit, weathered it a bit, and this is weathering way in advance of the age, and plonked an Ogryn on top, and nothing wrong with that. A whole load of Reaver Titans who haven't really changed at all, given the latest of what's coming out of GW. And why do so? I mean, they look fantastic. And those Eldar, as I've said a million times, they really have weathered the ages. Those Jez Goodwin kind of concept drawings made flesh. I love those Mark Cobblestone commissars. I actually have one floating around the garage, and I have plans to get it out and use it for Xenos Rampant. But given this is Golden Demon, someone has just kind of gone wild with dry brushing in a cack-handed manner that even I would realise is just too much. These two ogres, Thomas Anderson, with 2 S's and no H in the T. Because this is the overseas category. And I mean, these look a bit flat, but again, what paints did they really have to use? And what knowledge would they have had to realise all the different methods that we now sort of see all over the many YouTube painting tip guides given by some very professional artists? Rhino and Crew by Joachim Stelbach. A Minotaur Lord, also by Thomas Anderson. And a Space Marine walking around a kind of 1980s spray-painted city. An Oriental Dragon by Kim Boss. I don't remember Citadel making an Oriental Dragon, but I doubt they'd have put it in if it wasn't theirs. Loads of Blood Bowl stuff. And the winners. A Spine Dragon by Brian Moore. An Eldar Titan. A Goblin Standard Bearer. Where is the Goblin? There's the Goblin. Jewellery chain as ever. A well-populated feature of all of this. Greater Demon of Nurgle, Puppeteer by Mick Beard. I mean, that's ingenious though, to be fair. You see a giant hand, stick a bit of chain on it, and attach it to some kind of demon. And you've got a kind of philosophical question. Is the marionette a real thing? Or is it infused with the powers of chaos? Or is it a mere puppet? A Dwarf Knight, and that's something that should be captured somehow. A Rhino by Mark Delicata. And a Warlord and Warhound Titan going for a bit of a walk together. A Harlequin Jet-like with a slight metallic, pinkish, purplish sheen. Not sure how they managed to do that in those days. A Rhino by David Soper. Oh, Spine Dragon. So it must have been a Games Workshop miniature. And a Minotaur Lord combination, which looks very much like some kind of conversion, again, on some wedding cake topper that's been sliced up and broken down. The Blood Bowl team, some amazing freehand on a banner of a Chaos Dreadnought. And wow, look at that. A scratch-built Traitor Scout Titan in 28mm scale by Tony Cottrell. I mean, to make that out of scratch is quite something. Although it does look slightly more alien than Games Workshop. I don't know why. No, maybe more Star Wars. But then again, that's unsurprising. But a beautiful thing, nevertheless. And then a Citadel painting guide bunged in at the back, which we won't go into too much. They tell you about tools, paints and brushes, preparing your model by scraping off all the metal bits, undercoating it with spray paint. Things haven't really changed that much. The base coat. Tips on applying the base coat. Colour, base colour, dark shade and highlight. And now indeed they make paints for each different stage. No doubt looking back at all of this, telling you a bit about shading. And then obviously highlighting. And then fine detail. And then I'm always entertained by the insane detail brush they currently sell. And then finishing off saying if you use your miniatures for gaming, a coat of varnish will help protect your paintwork. I never use the spray can anymore for that because I've had one or two bad experiences where it all just kind of frosts your miniature, and it's better just to apply it all by hand. And then obviously a bit of sales going on at the back here. But the introduction by John Blanche is interesting, not least given I think he's just retired. John Blanche has been illustrating Games Workshop's range of fantasy games for nearly a decade. Wow, and that's in 1989. And he's just retired. My maths isn't very good, but that's a very long time. His work is known and admired throughout the world. It all started when John became hooked on painting little miniatures. In his spare time, when he's not tearing around the Nottingham countryside on his Harley Davidson, John still produces some of the finest finished models in the hobby. And so who better to introduce our miniatures painting guide? If you've never painted miniatures before, this guide will tell you exactly what to do because we don't have the internet yet, and so there's no other way you'll find out. For many of you, this will be it in terms of understanding all the techniques and methods out there and kind of retro engineering whatever you've seen in this book. Because all of you love Games Workshop so much, Citadel Miniatures has produced a huge range. As the quality of the models has improved, so too have the techniques used to paint them. Advanced techniques for shading, highlighting, blending, and picking out the intricate detail have resulted in miniatures of unparalleled subtlety and realism. You ain't seen nothing yet, John, of 1989. Miniature painting is now a major pastime in its own right. Plenty of people collect and paint miniatures, but never use them for gaming, which frankly is evident across this book because I'm not sure what the rules ever were for orcs on top of giant dinosaurs. The hobby has its own competitions, headed by the International Golden Demon Awards, this year in Derby. This booklet has been designed mainly for those of you who are new to the miniature painting hobby. To all of you, we'd like to say welcome aboard. The years of fun that have ensued for all of us, at which I think we'll leave it. Thank you for watching to the end. If you'd like to subscribe, by all means, please do. It'll give me a bit of a boost. And what's in it for you? Well, I've just found that I actually have the 1988 book of Golden Demon entries, which I'll whip out and read through at some point in the future. Please do leave any comments. Always interesting to hear people's feedback. One person got back on the last one that I did and said, I was there at those awards, and that was my entry, which was fantastic. So by all means, if you're one of those people, definitely get back in touch. Otherwise, keep well, keep safe, and see you all very soon. Cheers.